very hard to separate Jews from the food.
Yeah. Fortunately, it's a good way to get Jews into the room.
Yeah. We have passion. Only because there's our live stream audience is away.
Ah.
And they're all have the coffee and cake too.
And they're in their pajamas.
Everybody, please.
That was the only really good part of when I was president here.
Yeah.
Everything was on Zoom, even
Ah.
the services.
Nice. I'll tell you, as bad as the whole experience was, Zoom was an awfully good thing to come out of it.
Yes.
It's people who can participate now who couldn't before.
It definitely served a wonderful purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, as we begin session 2, feel free if you have any questions or if you'd like to make a comment, just raise your hand. Thank you very much.
Or interrupt.
I'm
It'll
famous-
feel like home.
I'm famous for doing that.
It'll feel like
unfortunately.
home. Okay. Oh.
Yeah, the surgeries went well.
There we are.
For any of you who missed my comment, I just said if you have any questions while Rabbi Dubin is speaking, or if you want to make a comment, just raise your hand.
That's, I'm fine, but this is the eternal question in every shul. So,
Is everyone comfortable? Is anyone too cold?
yeah.
Okay, I guess it's only me.
No, it's just every year when we have the questionnaire after the holidays, give feedback. They never talk about the liturgy. It's only about the temperature. So, okay. Is this the crowd? I guess this is the crowd. Are there?
Get started. Because live stream is waiting. I'll pull them in.
Gotcha. Okay. So, listen, I neither food nor children nor animals. If they come before me, forget it. But having worked as a Jewish professional in the boarding school world for a while, thank goodness for food to get the kids in. So, give them pizza, they'll be there. I feel awkward starting when there are people out there, so,
No, just,
I guess they know the time.
yeah.
So, what we were talking about before was really, in most ways, I hope it was a warning for what can happen if we don't do anything. I will tell you just from the beginning, I'm probably not going to come up with a solution that you all can do to fix everything, but I hope to give some guidance. And not my own guidance, but guidance that I take out of Jewish tradition as best I can. So we were talking before about God as judge, and judge not only how we treat other people, but how we treat, and also definitely how we treat the vulnerable, but also how we treat the world itself and all of the creations of God. So God's expectations, they come with reward and punishment. And we've talked about punishment so far, but we've not really talked about reward. So let's talk about that a little bit. What we know from Jewish tradition, and I'm talking here as more of a theologian than a scientist, but what we know is that God has given us everything we need to make it work. And now it's up to us to figure out how to take those parts and make it work. And so we look to the Psalms. And in the Psalms, we see, especially in Psalm 104, which I have part of it on the screen here, is that the psalmist in here paints a picture of a God who has abounding love for the natural world. It's a God who has love that is so strong that God will stop at nothing in order to satisfy nature's needs. And while we humans have been hard at work depleting our water sources in pursuit of all sorts of inconsequential wants that we have, desires that we have, God makes springs gush forth in torrents. Where am I? Here. Makes springs gush forth in torrents. They make their way between the hills, giving drink to all the wild beasts. So when God gets involved with the natural resources, they are abundant. They serve the needs of those who are getting them, and God does it in a way that seems to be endless. Somehow God figured out the way to make it sustainable. And so that is part of our mission as those who are trying to imitate God. If God made it sustainable in plenty for everyone's needs, humans and animals alike, and the earth as well, so too, therefore, should we be striving to do the same as we imitate God. God, here we are, he waters the mountains, God waters the mountains, satisfies the fruit of the work. It's all good. So then we continue on here, and we see this is towards the end of the psalm, the same psalm, talking about in such glorified language about all of these things, all of these resources that God is investing in the natural world, and not only investing, but using. God is both making sure that it's still going to be there for use and using it. So we don't have to simply make it sustainable by never using it. We ought to be using it for its intended purposes, and not just our wants. But when God does that, God rejoices that this makes God happy for all of the resources to be used wisely for good reason. And of course, all of that I was just referring to here in the previous part of the psalm, all of this water and so forth that's being spent on proper usage, that's divine work. So we, in the image of God, imitating God, have that responsibility to be stepping into, to walk after God, as we said before. And when we do that kind of work, we are doing the work of God. So, here we are, whoops. So from that, we have the fundamental lesson, I think, of Jewish understandings or Jewish texts about the natural resources in the world, which is that since God loves and cares for the natural world so deeply that God will stop at nothing to ensure that every one of creation's needs are met, since we are charged with the obligation of striving to imitate the qualities of God, therefore, it's not only a fundamental covenantal obligation for us to care for the natural world, but it's also achievable. That we are going to imitate God, and now that we think, oh, this is something that we might be able to achieve, now comes the challenge of figuring out how to do that. But speaking of a covenantal obligation, this now gets to the story of Noah. So the notion of covenant in Torah. There are different kinds of covenants. Some covenants, God simply gives us something and we make use of it. Some covenants, there's a two-way obligation. But even when God gives us something without necessarily asking specifically for things in return, it still is pretty clear that we can screw it up. And I'm looking specifically now at Noah's covenant, because we think of the covenant that God makes with Noah, where God promises never to destroy the world again by flood. God makes this promise to us without having a very clear ask in return. I think if we look at where we have come in over the centuries, it seems pretty clear that even if God has made this promise to us that flooding will never destroy the world again, that we still have found ways to destroy the world, and so it's a covenant that I think if we are going to have the benefit of this covenantal relationship with God, even in this one where God makes no specific ask in return, there are obligations, because we can screw it up if we don't behave responsibly. So in this case, this covenant is established between God, so I, meaning God, establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come. And so that is a very clear point from the beginning. Remember, first we had Adam, who was from Adam. We had the creation of the world, and every single human being that comes after relates back to Adam. But then what do the human beings do? We start transgressing all sorts of things, and in the process, God says, I think I made a mistake. And so we've had creation, and then we have destruction from God, and now we're having recreation. And so now every human being is going to come from through the line of Noah. And we're starting again. And so the important part here I want to point out is it's not just with him. It is with everyone to come afterwards, because every human being traces back to Noah. And God is being excessively generous here, I would say, where it says, I will maintain my covenant with you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. So God's going to keep trying to protect us, and we have no ask. There seems to be nothing that God is asking. But as I said before, reality suggests that there is an ask, and that ask is that we act responsibly. So, all right. So then, along this line of having the covenant be for all ages to come, we then look at Exodus. And in Exodus, we have this notion that I, your God Adonai, am an impassioned God, and this is the important part, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third, upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. And so in this part of Exodus, we have this notion that if I transgress, I screw it up for my offspring. And certainly in the environmental world, that seems to be something quite understandable. That if I screw up this earth, my grandchildren are going to have more trouble. And they didn't do anything wrong. They just inherited the trouble that I made, right? On the other hand, we also, we like to think that people pay for their own sins. This is now getting away from science, getting towards theology. Why should what I do be paid for by my grandchildren? Because they did nothing wrong and I did. And for this reason, getting beyond environmental issues, with that argument, it's I guess, well, the Torah, not the Torah, the Bible itself also has an issue with this notion that my sins are paid for by other people, which is why later on in the Bible, Jeremiah, he comes and he reverses the idea. He says, no, what you do, you pay for. Your children are not going to pay for your sins because that's not fair. Says, it's the covenantal promise that is being made to Noah. It seems that every generation should be able to say, well, if I screw it up, I'll pay. Again, beyond the notion of environmentalism, certainly you can imagine just in regular legal matters that the guilty person's the one who pays, right? And for whatever legal transgression has happened in civil law, you don't punish someone who didn't do the wrong thing. The problem with that is that reality, as much as I want to be with Jeremiah, reality doesn't back it up. Beyond the environment, just ask the baby born with a drug addiction. There's so many ways that what we do, our children and grandchildren pay for, and at the same time, what we do, our children and grandchildren benefit from. And so in the world of justice, there's a question to be asked there about how much of my life is justifiably set before I'm even born. How much of my life depends on the choices that those who came before me made. the ideas of generational wealth in this country. There's no doubt that, people who descended from slaves in America, we don't have slavery anymore, but they're still paying the punishment they're paying the consequences for having been slaves, because generational wealth doesn't happen overnight. I, being born as I was, had a great advantage over lots of people who've been in this country a lot longer than I have. And there's no justice in that. And so certainly when we get to environmental justice, the ones who are paying the price did not commit the sin. And so we've got some obligation here. So when it comes to desecrating God's created world, how much more obvious could it be that we do pay the penalties for our parents' decisions, our parents' actions? The children living in the Bronx of New York, they didn't do anything to deserve the horrific asthma rates that they have. People going to a school that's built half a mile from a toxic dump. Their cancer is not because they did something wrong. These things have long-lasting effects, the punishments of mistakes that we make on the environment. So, as much as we are obligated to imitate God's behavior as best that we can, we're also compelled to imitate or to obey the ethical mitzvot, the ethical commandments. I talked before about halakha, the legal system in Judaism, and we know that in liberal forms of Judaism, we have a very different understanding of what our legal obligations are as Jews compared to some of our Orthodox friends. But we also know that as much as we like to think that every temple is autonomous unto itself, that's why we call them temples and not synagogues or shuls for the most part, because we are a temple unto ourselves. Now that the temple in Jerusalem is gone, we have our own temple, we make our own rules. That's pretty central to a reform way of looking at things, that we are autonomous. But we don't get to make up all of our rules either, because we do have obligations, ethical obligations, that the reform world has made very clear are not a choice. They are a commandment, an obligation. And so, for instance, love your fellow as yourself. Why are we supposed to love our fellow as ourselves? Because I am the Lord. And what does that mean? How is that a reason that we are to love our fellow people? Getting back to B'Tselem Elohim, that if we love God, as I think is taken as a given in this framework of thinking, that if we love God, that means we have the obligation to love our fellow person just the same, because we all are part of God. God is in all of us, the B'Tselem Elohim, the image of God. We can certainly go on that Exodus tells us that we are not to ill-treat the widow or the orphan. And if we mistreat them, what happens? God hears their outcry as soon as they cry out to God. It's not a choice. Reform Judaism is all about choice, but this is not a choice that we get to make. We don't get to say no. We don't want to do that. We choose to ignore that mitzvah. There are other mitzvot that are, along much more ritual lines or other kinds of commandments that Reform Judaism can make very good arguments that these are not applicable to our lives today, but this is not one of them. The ones that dictate how we are to treat others with love and respect, those are as obligatory as anything else can possibly be in a reform framework. And so we accept those as binding on us. You know, it's hard to think in Reform Judaism that we can be bound by an external law, but here I think we are when it comes to the ethical mitzvot. And so obviously this is, you know, it mentions the widow or the orphan, but it's not just talking about the widow or the orphan if we're talking about principles by which we are to live. Widow or orphan, those words could be substituted with the vulnerable, the weak, the powerless, that we have obligations to treat the powerless with love and concern and respect. And if we don't, God's going to hear about it. And we've already decided before that we don't want God to hear about the bad things, because it doesn't turn out well. And so getting back to God as the judge, God the one who loves justice, as Abraham points out earlier, that again, I imagine this may be a familiar verse to some. It's one that the Reform movement has really put at the center of who we strive to be. But it is justice that we are supposed to be pursuing at all times. And so when it talks about the justice that we are supposed to be pursuing, that actually doesn't really come as a surprise to us, I don't think. You know, because we are created in God's image, and so the fact that we should be prone to love, to protect, to pursue justice, that's not a surprise. That seems very much in line with what we would expect. On the other hand, as we look around, we may want to ask ourselves, are we really doing it well enough? And it's not such an easy question, because I have a feeling that if we ask this question, we may not be satisfied with the answers that we find, especially when it comes to our choices, how our choices affect the most vulnerable amongst us. And what happens, you know, if we look at the negative side of this statement, when we pursue justice, we're going to thrive and occupy the land that God is giving us. But if we turn it on its side and we say, therefore it seems that if we are not pursuing justice, then we're not going to thrive and we're not going to occupy the land that God is giving us. Things are going to be turned upside down and it's not going to be pleasant. And so with that notion, I think about, you know, the fact that as Secretary Guterres of the United Nations wrote, he said, he points out this outrageous truth, and in his words it says, people living in developing nations of South Asia are 15 times more likely to die from climate impacts than people living in the United States or Europe, and yet they produce only a tiny fraction of the greenhouse gases that lead to such disasters. And this is getting now to that reality that that we are accepting begrudgingly, or at least I accept begrudgingly, about people not paying for their own sins. That when we do something that transgresses God's desired order, we may do all right, but other people are going to pay for it. and that's not justice. So according to, there's a human rights organization called Climate Refugees. And this comes from a report that they wrote. I've condensed it, but it's still pretty long. They say, data reveal that because of global warming, 17 countries, home to 1/4 of the world's population, face extremely high levels of baseline water stress, where irrigated agriculture, industries, and municipalities withdraw more than 80% of their available supply on average every year. 44 countries, home to 1/3 of the world, face high levels of stress, where on average more than 40% of available supply is withdrawn every year. Such a narrow gap between supply and demand leaves countries vulnerable to fluctuations like droughts or increased water withdrawals, which is why we're seeing more and more drought-related refugees in search of safe places to live. And so, just think about one of the easily wealthiest parts of the world. Let's think about New Jersey. There's a drought right now, and there are wildfires going on. And those two things seem to me pretty clearly related. That we've had this terrible lack of rain, and we have the fires. So, if that's what's happening in the wealthiest part of the world, can only imagine what's happening in the poorest parts of the world where people are the most vulnerable. And so let's stick with where we are here in America, the results of having treated our natural earth with such disdain. Well, I don't know if disdain's the right word, such irresponsibility. Having treated our world, having harvested our world, the resources, without giving full attention to the sustainability of what we've been doing and to the effects that what we do have on others. Here in this country, according to, there's an affordable housing advocacy organization called Housing Matters. And they report that 1 in 6 Americans lives within 3 miles of a toxic waste site. And they often live within that distance unknowingly. So scattered across the country, some of these sites are visible, but others, such as abandoned industrial facilities, they can be very inconspicuous. And we don't really know that they're there. And it poses the greatest threat by far to communities of color. For nearly a century, discriminatory laws and policies have situated polluting industries near low-income communities of color and have led to the development of subsidized and affordable housing on or close to Superfund sites. Yes.
Rabbi, it seems like many of us have to suffer because there are those out there who have misplaced priorities, and their only thing they're focused on is money and making more money. And, look at the results that have happened, like DuPont, and go on and on.
Right.
The water situation in Detroit.
The lead pipes, yeah. So this is a concern that I hope, not surprisingly, comes up in Torah. And keep that in mind, because there will be a slide that addresses exactly what you're talking about. Yes?
Rabbi, with the words justice, I think of civil justice.
historically and presently deliberately polluted our water, polluted our air, put in their products toxic substances that
Mhm.
cause people extensive injury and death. And it's not well known that some of these companies take advantage of a loophole in the bankruptcy laws where they are permitted to, it's called the Texas two-step, where they're permitted to create an offshoot of their corporation, put all their liabilities, or what they anticipate to be future liabilities, into the new company, and then change the name, which is not well known,
Yeah.
and that company then declares bankruptcy. So there's no civil recourse at all, and it's very disheartening. And how do we as citizens, handle that without being so disillusioned and judgmental?
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point, and the beginning of an answer to your question, I think, is to point out that everything I'm discussing today, using Jewish sources in a Jewish setting to raise awareness of the issues, is in my mind, it's got to start there. Is that, like I said before, I'm not going to be able today to give you 4 things to do and then the world will be fixed. But what I am able to do is to give some principles that Jewish thinking has been resting on for centuries or millennia, some principles of what justice looks like. And with that knowledge, one of the things you just said is that very few people know about it. And that's the answer, I think, is to use knowledge, to use an understanding of what is expected of us as Jews in order to bring things to light. And it's when things get brought to light, what is that? Sunlight is the best disinfectant, is that's where I hope it will lead us. Other than that, I can't do too much more right now. And of course, one of the issues with these companies, and I say these companies as a broad statement about lots of people and organizations and companies, is that they do a cost-risk analysis, and they figure that the cost of paying a fine is nothing compared to the financial benefit that we're going to get for making this product the cheapest way we can. And they wind up making a lot of money. And that's where our advocacy comes in. I'm speaking, again, as a theologian, but Judaism, religion in general, has a very deep history of being political. I'm not here to suggest which candidates you should vote for. I am here to suggest that Jewish tradition advocates for certain principles. And those principles ought to be adhered to when we choose the people that we are going to put in power. So that's a real issue that we have, when we're talking about housing in this country, that we have so many of the most vulnerable members of our society who are living in government-owned, government-subsidized housing, literally on a Superfund site. How can we possibly expect justice to come out of that? When the children born into these homes are starting off life breathing toxic fumes. It doesn't work. That said, maybe the statistics I shared might be surprising, but the notion that the poor and the vulnerable suffer environmental injury beyond their measure, I doubt that's really very surprising, if we think about it. And because how many communities that can actually afford the financial burden, of safer places to live or bottled water to buy, how many of them are going to be relying on the assistance of others? If we can afford to buy healthier things for ourselves, we do, and those who can't afford it wind up paying the price of the whole system. So the great first century BCE Jewish sage Hillel the Elder, he famously taught that what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor, and that is the law, the rest is merely commentary. That's a statement that perhaps you've heard before from the Talmud, Masechet Shabbat. And assuming that that's a true statement, and I do assume that's a true statement, can we really expect God to judge us favorably if we are willing to continue contributing, whether we do it intentionally or not, to the environmental devastation of millions of people, or frankly, billions of people, if we continue to do things that have such devastating effects on people's homelands that are thousands of miles away from where we are very comfortable? None of us, no person can ever be able to omit completely our reliance on greenhouse emitting products. We live in a world where it's a necessity. If I wanted to be able to come and be with you today, I had to drive my car. There's really no other practical way for me to get here. But isn't it time, I think, that at the very least that we start looking at more ways to reduce the effects that we have on the world, on consumption? And wouldn't that be the righteous way to behave? To see how can we do something that at best is better than what we're doing now, and at worst is less damaging than what we're doing now, so that we can have a change of ways. So with that notion, there we are. From the book of Leviticus again, from what is called the Holiness Code. This is where we are taught that we should be holy because God is holy. So from the Holiness Code, it says, "Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Lord. I am Adonai." Notice, it's not saying that we have to go and fix everything, even though it would be nice if we could. The ethical obligation, the moral obligation that Torah is putting on us here is that if someone is hurting, we need to do something about it. We're told elsewhere that it's not up to us to complete the task, but we're also not free to ignore reality. And so if our neighbor is bleeding, we need to find a cure, or we need to make that person more comfortable at least. We need to do something. And so our neighbors, both near and far, I think they are bleeding right now. Our neighbors around the world are hurting terribly from what humanity has done to our natural environment, to our earth, and we can't stand idly by. So lots of them are bleeding even to the point of death. Millions are bleeding to the point of death, especially when we think about drought, about scarcity of food, about how food scarcity has spurred on military wars. That, our environmental destruction is literally causing people to shoot each other. And that is not something for which I want to be responsible. I want to be able to find a way that's not my responsibility. But I can't say it's not my responsibility by just ignoring it. The only way I can say it's not my responsibility is if I'm doing something to fix it. And so that would be the righteous path to take. That would be, in my mind, walking after God, imitating God. And so to that notion, there we go. To that notion of pursuing righteousness, pursuing justice, here the word for justice is tzedakah. So the psalmist tells us again that the Lord is righteous, the Lord is just, and God loves justice. That seems to me, if God loves it, so should we. If God is saying that God is just, we have to strive to be just. And so, if God loves justice, when we love justice, we are imitating God, no doubt. And of course, if I had to think of one fundamental mandate that Jewish tradition, that Jewish expectations has put upon me, it is to imitate God as best I can. And so we have to ask, is it justice when we allow our unrestrained consumerism to play even a minor role in the 1/3 of Pakistan being submerged in water in the last couple of years? Is it justice when we allow industrial chemical dumps to pollute the water systems of inner city neighborhoods just so that our cleaning sprays can be 5 cents cheaper by the bottle? We brought up before the Detroit drinking water. Is it justice when we allow lead to be pumped into the homes of people who don't have the resources to fix it on their own? None of this is justice. And so because this is not justice, it's not even close. In fact, the way the world is right now, it's the exact opposite of justice. So we can't afford to sit back and any longer and allow the status quo to continue without even making an effort to reverse it. And when we're talking about making an effort to reverse it, that also requires that we have knowledge about what we're actually doing. That this is one of those situations. Earlier today, I said that we are responsible in God's eyes for the transgressions we make, knowingly or not. So if we are, none of us right now knows if we are making unknowing transgressions, but we have the obligation, the Jewish obligation, I think, to do our homework and to figure out, am I responsible for this or that? Have I done this or that might be causing pain elsewhere? And so I rely here on a woman named Margaret Bullitt Jonas. She is an Episcopal priest and a leader in environmental justice. She teaches us that climate change is not just one of a whole bunch of different causes that we might care about. It's a cause that affects everything that we cherish. The Pentagon has long called climate change a threat multiplier. When we're talking about violence around the world, it amplifies climate change, is amplifying existing problems and creating more. So if we care about, hopefully we are out of COVID. I mean, COVID is every year with shots, but hopefully the shots will do what it needs. But there'll be another pandemic at some point, the way the world is going. If we care about pandemics, if we care about public health, we care about climate. Climate just makes these problems so much more likely and more challenging. If we care about racism, if we care about human rights, we care about climate, we care about the environment. If we care about poverty and homelessness and hunger, we care about the environment. Yes.
On Yom Kippur, when we go through the litany of sins, is anything referring to our sin for not paying attention to our environment or something similar to that effect reflected in any way in that list?
As I am going quickly in my head through the traditional liturgy, yes, I don't believe that blessing, that prayer has any specific climate.
Yeah, I think it has to be
I don't think
updated.
so. But I will, I'll share, maybe for the rabbi, I'll share what we do in my synagogue.
Yes, I'd love to hear
Is that at Yom Kippur, there are little cards that everyone writes down that says Cheshbon HaNefesh on it, accounting of our souls. And I encourage people to write down things that they hope they can do differently next year. Issues that are in their own minds. And then they deposit them anonymously, and then over the intervening days, I read them and I weave them together into our own communal al-chetz.
Oh, that's beautiful. Very personal.
And so by doing that, people recognize that, you know what? Yeah, the one that someone else has that I didn't write down, that's mine too. And that is a place where environmental issues might well come up. So Judaism, it's if we allow ourselves to be locked into what already exists, then we're not going to get anywhere. We always have to be willing to keep going. So, but so all of these. Oh yes.
I just wondering. So the I've heard of multiple injustices, but that's plural, right? So the code is that
Yes. So the quote. Yes.
So how would you translate that as a plural?
When it's in the plural here, the way I understand it is that it doesn't necessarily mean plural. What it means is it's huge. It's a huge thing. For instance, there are some words in Hebrew that are known only in the plural. Mayim, water. It's only in the plural, and it's grammatically treated as a plural word. So why is it plural? There are not lots of pieces of water, but water is huge, right? Or the heavens, Shemayim. It's just a huge concept. And here, the way I understand this word tzedakot is that it's attempting to do the same kind of thing. That it's saying that justice is an all-encompassing thing. And so when God loves justice, we need more than just a singular word to express it. So, So, let's see. So, for all of this, for all of these different reasons, for all of these different examples where environmental destruction causes social injustice, if we care about loving God, if we care about loving our neighbor as ourselves, just as the overriding principle, I think we have no choice but to care about the environment. Because when we don't, all of these social injustices come through very clearly. We have to do something about it. Now, we've been talking about Yom Kippur. We've been talking about Rosh Hashanah. Okay, you can't possibly read that, but it's on the handouts that I gave you. This is Torah that people who come to the holidays have heard before, from Deuteronomy 30. So what does God say to us? This is on Yom Kippur. God says, "See, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. For I command you this day to love your God, Adonai, to walk in God's ways and to keep God's commandments." Certainly, God's giving us a choice between life and death. And how are we going to choose life? We will choose life by walking in God's ways and keeping God's commandments, and so on and so forth. But if your heart turns away and you give no heed and are lured into the worship and service of other gods, I declare to you this day that you shall certainly perish. You shall not long endure on the soil that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. And so here, this is quintessential, this is fundamental to the holidays, that we are making a choice. There is a choice put before us to choose life or to choose death. And when we're thinking about it in the high holiday sense of things, it's more metaphorical. I think when we're talking about the environment, it gets less metaphorical. And it becomes more, you know the word. And so we need to choose life, no doubt. It's a grand statement. It's inspiring, and I think we have it in our hands to choose life. And when we do, there's no telling how wonderful our lives will become. And it's no wonder that this is a verse on which so many rabbis focus when we read this passage. That said, I'd like to look not at the choosing the life part. I'd like to look, if your heart turns away and you give no heed and are lured into the worship and service of other gods, I declare to you this day that you shall certainly perish. I think too many of us fail to take the messaging of these words seriously. What happens when we fail to take these words seriously when it comes to environmental concerns is that we have severe consequences, both from action that people take and inaction that people should take but don't. Words like hoax, when it comes to environmental concerns, have entered our vernacular as regular words that people might use to talk about environmental concerns, because, like we were saying before, short-term comfort rules the day. Selfishness puts blinders on too many of our eyes, so much so that we can no longer, so many of us in this country can no longer discern reality from fantasy when it comes to environmental concerns. And all too often, it is those who have some material profits to make who choose to continue blinding us, even when they have all the information they need to know that they are lying to us. And so getting back to Jeremiah, the 6th century prophet, he speaks about false prophets when he warns us of the Israelite leaders who were downplaying the Babylonian threat that was leading up to the fall of the temple in 586 BCE. Brenda, I told you before to hold on for a slide. This is it. Because what is Jeremiah saying to us? He's saying, from the smallest to the greatest, they are all greedy for gain. Priest and prophet alike, they all act falsely. They offer healing offhand for the wounds of my people, saying, all is well, when nothing is well. And they have acted shamefully, they have done abhorrent things, yet they do not feel shame, and they cannot be made to blush. Assuredly, they shall fall among the falling. They shall stumble at the time when I punish them, says the Lord. So these environmental injustices, yes?
I just want to make the comment that I think so many people are just plain lazy, and they just want their lives to go along as easy as possible. And it takes effort to do things to take care of the environment and modify your life to accomplish that. And they don't care enough to put out the effort to deal with a little, making things less comfortable for you.
Yeah, so I think there's it's a two-way road of responsibility here, that each individual has a responsibility to give serious thought to the topic and to amend their ways as appropriate. But the other side of it is that those who are in the power structure, those who are making money off of all of this, have every economic incentive to lie to others, and lazy, perhaps, ignorant, perhaps, when so many facts in quotation marks, when so many ideas are being thrown at us, I think it's only natural to the human way of thinking that we'd rather believe the ones that make us live an easier, happier, lazier life. Yeah. Well, so I don't want to put, I don't want to put more blame than I think is appropriate on the regular human being who is making bad decisions. But I'd rather put more of the responsibility on those who are encouraging them to make the bad decisions. And those are the ones we heard before about the companies that set up the shell companies and all of that. It's the leaders of industry who have the financial gain to make, who are, I think, giving us all of these ideas that sound really good to us, so we accept them when we shouldn't.
One comment.
Yep.
We've been doing this dance thing mainly in a national context, and this is the hardest issue humanity has ever faced, and we have to do it in an international context. It's global.
Absolutely.
And I think Jeremiah particularly lets us know that in our hearts we know this has to be a spiritual revolution. It really does come from the heart, It comes from our love, and it comes from our capacity to find each other in love to move forward. And it won't just be done by us in New Jersey or even the United States. It really has to be an international movement. But I do also think we are moving closer to that, whatever that moment will be, that will move this to
Yeah.
kind of a much more intense
I think so.
engagement. Because people really are, I think, afraid as much as anything else right now, and they don't know how to respond.
Yes, and fear makes us do some very strange things sometimes. But about your point about environmental concerns being a spiritual endeavor, I would say, from your lips to the world's ears, that this is, to me, absolutely fundamental, that we all need to buy into this idea that economics matter terribly, but even if we're looking at economic issues about, spending more money to save this, whatever, this is a theological question to me. And the theological question, or not question, the theological mandate is that we are to imitate God. So we've got to do something.
There's a very cute tweet from the National Park Service. It
Oh, yeah?
says it's okay to follow your heart, but it also helps to check the map once in a while. And I'm saying, I think
Yeah.
that's what you provided here.
Well, I hope so. Thank you for that, because that's what I'm trying to do. Yes?
I'm trying to make you feel more optimistic. You have control thermonuclear warfare as a world, a whole world. Maybe we can become afraid enough of this that maybe we can get this right too.
Well, I hope so.
I'm trying to be an optimist.
And that's where the deadline comes in, and the test at the end of it comes in, that whatever it takes each one of us to be spurred to action. If it's threat, I'll take threat. If it is encouragement, I'll take encouragement. But we all have that responsibility one way or another.
Believe it.
Yes, and it's, as was said, it is a spiritual enterprise. And so we turn to the rabbinic world, the Midrash, Ecclesiastes. It says, when God created the first human beings, God led them around all the trees of the garden and said, look at my works, see how beautiful they are, how excellent. For your sake I created them all. See to it that you do not spoil or destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one else to repair it. If that's not a threat, I don't know what is, and it's a threat that I hope people take seriously. And if you don't want to believe me, I'm just a guy with, I studied Bible and I have a rabbinic degree. So let's take Albert Einstein. He knows a lot of things, or knew a lot of things. And I just think he really makes it very clear. The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything except our thinking. We are drifting towards catastrophe beyond conception. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive. Now, he was talking about nuclear things, but it's equally applicable to what we're discussing today, is that we need a new manner of thinking. And so what is that new manner of thinking that we need? What is it that we'll have to do if we really want to survive? And I wish I had a simple answer, but I don't. I can't give you a simple answer because there is no simple answer. But what I do know is that until we transform our thinking as a society, as a world society, until we transform our thinking to recognize and to prioritize the presence of life and indeed of love in our environmental stewardship, we'll never be able to even begin thinking of what the next step is to solve these issues. And the 12th century Spanish master Ibn Ezra, he put it very simply. He says that human life depends on trees. Now, when he was saying it, he did not have the environmental destruction that we're talking about today, but he recognized our unavoidable intertwining with the natural world. We mentioned before that the human being was created from the earth. We have that connection. Everything. We are dependent upon the natural world. And here, from the book of Job, how are we going to learn new things? How are we going to have new thinking? When Job is, remember, Job is undergoing some serious suffering at the moment, and Job is trying to find out, what can I do to make my life easier? What can I do to alleviate the suffering? Ask the beasts to teach you. Ask the birds of the air to tell you, the plants of the earth to instruct you, the fish of the sea to inform you. Who among them do not understand that behind all life is God's hand? Okay? We may not like the idea, if you look at the book of Job, his friends are trying to tell him, don't worry so much, God knows. It's a theological issue unto itself. But if we take this perhaps out of context, this is the beginning of the answer to me. How do we know how to fix the environment? How do we know how to fix God's creation? Let's start by asking God's creation, what do you need? We have to look at what's there in order to figure out what the appropriate next step will be for us. I'll put it in terms for this building. The new rabbi who comes into the congregation and knows immediately how to fix everything is going to last in the job for a month, right? The first thing you have to do is listen to the congregation and understand who they are, what they need, because we can't fix things if we don't ask what they need. I don't know how better to put it than we have here in Job. If we're going to fix the world, we have to ask the world, because they know. And, environmental scientists who study animal life, they come out with all of these just remarkable observations about how they can predict different things by what animals are doing, and how if we see what's the logical outcome of what we are doing and how animals are reacting, then we can reverse the way we're doing things, so that, because animals are telling us it's not working. There have to be other ways to do things. Here, this from the Babylonian Talmud is a statement about the inherent value of the natural world beyond the spiritual. Because there are those people, and I don't think I blame them. Those people, there are plenty of people, maybe the majority of people, who are most convinced by a practical argument. Why should I care about the earth? Because the earth takes care of me, and if I don't care about the earth, it's going to get more expensive. And why do we change the bulbs to LED? Because it's cheaper. That'll get people to do it, even though, of course, it has the effect of conserving energy, which is good for the earth. So here, The English here is more than the Hebrew. The English is filling in spaces in between words. But Rav Yehuda said, everything that the Holy One, blessed be God, created in the world, God did not create anything for naught. God created a snail as a remedy for a sore. God created a fly to be crushed and spread as a remedy on a wasp. And it goes on. Every animal, every one of God's creatures has benefit for humanity. And if that's what it takes to convince you that we should care about the natural world because it takes care of us, and if we don't take care of the natural world, we're going to suffer for it, good enough for me. I'll take a practical argument if you want a practical argument. And what we don't want is getting back to the story of the flood, that God notices our wickedness. And when the wickedness in chapter 6 of Genesis gets too severe, God says, you know what, I made a mistake. And God destroys the earth. God had created it, God can destroy it. But what I want to point out is that God regretted that God made humanity on earth, and God's heart was saddened. When this destruction comes, that is opposed to God's desires. That makes God unhappy. When we do things that hurt ourselves, God is unhappy. God here is the metaphorical parent who looks at the child, the young child who gets hurt or who does something really bad and has some sort of consequence from it. The consequence is natural, but the parent feels bad. It doesn't mean the parent doesn't love the child, but when you do certain things, other results are going to happen. And we hope they don't, but they do. And so God, in this verse here, is telling me that if we keep on acting badly, destruction's going to happen, and that's going to make God sad. In other words, God's not going to stop it from happening, because that's not what God does. God has given us all the resources to do it well, and we need to do it as well as we can. This is what I was talking before about Everett Fox translation. The Lord God formed the human from the soil's humus, blowing into nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living being. We are undoubtedly, that was supposed to, here, let me get back to it, because that's the final slide. But, well, I don't know what happened, but there we are. So it's a good thing it happened at the last slide. So God formed us from the earth. We and the earth are inseparable. If the earth dies, we die with it. If the earth thrives, we thrive with it. And this, I think, is how we make God happy. We make God happy by thriving. God, the parent, wants the children to succeed. But God can't make the children succeed. It's up to the children to do the hard work. God can be our model. God can be our cheerleader. God can support us. But God can't do it for us. And so that's where we are. Fortunately, I think we're able to do it. So I'll take any questions or comments.
Any more questions from our audience?
There's one here first.
So So, Debbie Downer here.
So you'll give us the deadline.
No, not really a deadline. Well, maybe January 20th. I'm not optimistic. I'm sad and angry and upset, and I don't think it's going to go well. And a lot of what we're talking about here really needs to be in the mind of the people who are going to be in charge on January 20th, and it's not, you know? And so to your point, agreed that this needs to be an international effort, but we tried that, and there was a climate agreement, and January 20th pulled out of it in 2016. So I don't see this country joining with other nations around the world to do what's necessary.
They're being an oil-producing country. It's not working out that way.
But say that again?
COP agreement of the international agreements is not the solution. It was the next step. We need a better next step.
Right, but it's a pattern that I think will repeat itself. So I'm sort of skeptical. Having said that, I had made a decision even before I came here, and now I'm really committed to it, to look at my end of year giving and sort of shift. I've always given to environmental causes, but sort of shift more heavily there. And I think the places that need our help are going to be the ones who can at very least do something in the courts. So National Resources Defense Council is top of my list, Earth Justice, and there may be a couple of others who can carry the ball, at least for a while.
So let me just respond quickly to what you said. You started by saying Debbie Downer. How about if we look at it instead of Debbie Downer in a more optimistic way, which is that with all of these concerns that we have, this is our opportunity to get out there and make a difference. This is our opportunity to go and, from our perspective, to talk about these theological / social / scientific issues, and to make our voices heard. Because I think when challenges come, we, as the best things that we have, I guess, next to prophets, we have mouths that can go and can advocate and can hopefully make a difference. But I think that's our mandate now, is to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work.
So I had a couple things I was going to put in there. One is, it's not as big an issue. You and I talked about this. There are examples where the countries of the world did get together and did solve environmental problems. Even without, the ozone hole is one. The ozone hole was a big problem in the 1980s. Countries of the world got together. They formed what was called the Montreal Protocol to get rid of chlorofluorocarbons in various sprays. They've done a good job on that. It's not gone, but the ozone hole is smaller than it was. It seems to be going. It's not as big and all-encompassing a problem, but there's a precedent right there. There's lots of opportunities for action and to make our voices heard. There are a lot of people who still aren't paying attention. There was this movie, Don't Look Up, that came out a couple of years ago, and so there's that kind of thing. There are a number of states and municipalities who are suing fossil fuel companies for the damages created by the greenhouse gas that they put in, and they're moving forward. New Jersey is one of the states that has a suit ongoing, and we can add our support to that. There's lots of opportunities, as you say, and the problem with the deadline, it's nice to have a deadline, but there's no hard deadline here. The deadline is very soft.
Yes, it is. And we may be the frog in the pot as the water gets hotter. So,
We can never give up.
yeah, that's clear. We have one more minute until 4:30.
I'll hold you to it. Oh, one other question.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm not Hebrew fluent, but when you had up on the screen about justice, I flashed back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's first yard site,
Yeah.
a Friday night. She was gone, right, on Rosh Hashanah.
That's right. Yeah.
And her sign in her office said, "Justice, justice, we shall pursue." And her very first case was not for women. It was for a man whose wife died and he was entitled to her Social Security. We haven't come very far since the Supreme Court then, which wasn't as bad as it is now, socked it to every Jew, whether Orthodox, Reform, Reconstructionist, any of us, who believe that without the mother, there is no baby. So I'm also a little, well, more than pessimistic. I'm still in a state of shock. People have written Shiva. Now we're in Shloshim. It's only 30 days. Really, it's a Jewish tradition. And I'm hoping that groups like Clean Ocean Action, she was my next door neighbor, the windmills, the laws that are being overrun, and now what's supposed to be clean, they're still taking Red Bank. Here we are, Red Bank. You think we have recycling? Everything goes into the same truck. It goes in barges, in plastic bags to Virginia, where we rent space. And right here, ITT, International Flavors and Fragrances, they get away with, because they're so big, such big employers, the coloring, the flavoring from companies I worked for in the early 1970s, the rules are not important anymore. And the federal government, it's like the electoral vote. The federal government is in charge of women's bodies now, so.
Okay. And I will just say that you're talking about going through a Jewish tradition of mourning, of shloshim, and so forth. It is also ingrained into the Jewish psyche that we are survivors, and that we've had challenges in every generation. No reason to think that there's a challenge out there that we can't get through. It's what I do. So, thank you all very much.
Don't go anywhere. I have some closing remarks.
Sit back
Now I know how the rabbi and cantor feel when they're up here and people start drifting out the doors.
That doesn't happen.
Well, aren't you special? Okay, I would just like to thank very much Rabbi Dubin for a very thought-provoking and relevant program. I know that we will leave here today with a much better understanding of our responsibilities to fulfilling God's mandate for taking care of the earth. And it made me think of tikkun olam, repairing the world, a central concept of Judaism, which also implies that we are caretakers of the earth, and our lives and the lives of future generations depend on the actions we take to help it and make sure that it survives. So with that, I encourage you to go home and make a list of things that you can do, a variety of things that Jay was referring to, and Alice and Brenda brought up points, but things you can do in your home, your own personal lives, to make a difference and make things better to help accomplish that goal. And I would also just like to acknowledge members of our Adult Ed Committee who made today's program possible. Cantor Clissold set up the live streaming. Our Director of Congregational Learning, Magda Reyes, provided our tech support. God bless her. And Eleanor Rubin and Ellen oh, wait, I always get your names. Eleanor, I got it right. Eleanor Rubin and Ellen Rubenstein help with check-in and food contributions. And most especially, my wonderful and supportive partner and co-chair, Maddie Calv, always by my side. And Maddie and I are very grateful for any of you who made contributions to our Adult Ed Fund today or in the past. Fortunately, our Shabbat Kallah program is funded by a generous bequest set up many years ago by Bob Rosen, past MRT president, who had a great passion for study and prayer, but that fund has really dwindled over the years, which makes your contribution so much more important. So keep us in mind whenever you make a temple donation in remembrance of an important life event. And I'm almost done. Wayne, you could sit. Okay. This is just the last thing, our next upcoming program. That is going to take place, and Maddie's very excited about this. I know she's done a lot of preparation for it. On December 15th, a Sunday, it will take place in our social hall, in person only, but there's going to be great food there because even a little bit better than today. We will be welcoming at that time, welcoming back Cantor Jonathan Komisar, who will be presenting Around the World of Jewish Music, not in 80 days, in 80 minutes. And publicity for this will be going out very shortly, so check your e-blasts and inboxes where you'll find the flyer. It'll give all the program details and how you can register. And Maddie and I hope to see many of you there. And some of you on live stream, you may come in person and join us. But thank you for being here. And
Can we say thank you to Brenda as well?
thank you. I just want to close and wish everyone a very wonderful, joyous, upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. Let's embrace it with optimism.
Thanksgiving service.
Oh, yes, Sunday at 3 p.m. Yes, I plan to go. I love the time and the date. Fits so much better.
Tomorrow I'm going to give a plug to my fellow choir member. 4 o'clock at the, I call it the Tower Hill, is it the Tower Hill Church visit? 4 p.m. Patriotic music. It's free. Free and great. There's going to be a small brass band.
Oh, one more thing. Anyone who gets to the Axelrod Theater, please, Ellen, stand up. Ellen has her beautiful artwork on display. I'm looking forward to seeing it tomorrow when I attend along with Eleanor Rubin, Fiddler on the Roof. And we are very much looking forward to it.
Field, not Bell, right? Not Bell Live, actual Axelrod. Yeah,
Axelrod Theater of Performing Arts, no?
there's two, yes, really.
Oh.
There's
Oh, okay.
And down in Deal, where there's an art show, and many of the performers in this Fiddler on the Roof were children in the original, back in the day. They're older now, Russian, Ukrainian, so it's a very special show, along with the artwork.
Okay, let's let everybody skedoodle. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Shalom.
Oh, thank you. Whoops, sorry.
I love all the references.
Oh, dude, nice.
You did a more.
Yeah, no.
Thank you.